开始之前呢，欢迎大家关注我，做我的原始粉丝。30天后，你真的会脱胎换骨。我们致力探索灵性成长、内在觉醒。准备好了就点个收藏或者点个赞。
You've asked it more than once, maybe even today. Why me? Why now? Why does it never end? The weight you've carried has turned into silence from above. Nothing makes sense. You've done what you could, believed, hoped, tried. Still, life continues to unravel in your hands. It's almost as if the universe is against you, pushing you beyond your limits, stripping everything away until only fragments remain. There's a point where pain no longer shocks, it just exhausts. Faith becomes brittle, and the idea of any greater plan starts to feel like a cruel illusion. Yet here you are, listening still, searching still, maybe not out of hope, but necessity. Maybe you've been broken too deeply to pretend anymore. And in that rawness, there's something real. There's something the universe sees that the world ignores. The pain you've been handed is not random, not a punishment, not meaningless. What seems like an endless series of heartbreaks may in truth be the groundwork of transformation. Pain often disguises its purpose. It enters like a thief, uninvited, disorienting and merciless. There is no warning, no logic, only the sharp edge of loss and the hollow ache of confusion. What was once clear becomes blurred. What once gave comfort now feels distant or stripped away altogether. But within this chaos, there lies a precision that is not visible to the human eye. Though it feels senseless, the pain that touches your life is rarely without intention. The universe does not deal in waste. Every wound, every delay, every disappointment carries the weight of meaning, even if that meaning is slow to emerge. Much of the world tells you to avoid suffering at all costs. Society idolizes ease, celebrates shortcuts, and glorifies instant gratification. But the deeper laws of existence do not operate on comfort. They operate on cultivation. In the economy of the universe, pain is not a punishment but a process, a fire that purifies, not a blade that destroys. Those who are called to carry weightier truths must first be emptied of everything shallow. Before a soul can become a sanctuary, it must first be stripped bare. The hand behind the breaking is not reckless, it is skilled. There is a reason transformation rarely happens in daylight. Seeds grow in darkness, caterpillars dissolve in silence before wings emerge. The very act of becoming often resembles falling apart. You may look at your life and see only rubble, but beneath that ruin, something ancient and sacred is taking root. The breaking is not meant to reduce you, it's meant to realign you. Old structures are being cleared. The scaffolding of false identity, shallow belief, and unmet expectation must collapse, so something stronger, more authentic, can rise in its place. You have not been discarded, you are being planted, buried in a season you did not choose, in soil you don't understand, and yet, it is here that your roots are growing, not visible to the eye, not celebrated by the world, but growing nonetheless. Every heartbreak becomes compost for wisdom. Every silence teaches you to hear more deeply. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the soul begins to reconfigure itself, not around what it had, but around what it is becoming. The ache itself becomes the architect of depth. In the stillness of suffering, the noise of ego begins to fade. You start to hear echoes of something older than circumstance, something eternal. The universe does not shape destiny in haste. It is not interested in shallow success, but in lasting significance. So it chisels slowly, often painfully, crafting character where there was once only ambition. The more hollowed you feel, the more room there is to be filled with what actually lasts. What appears as loss might be protection. What looks like failure could be foundation. Brokenness, in the hands of the universe, is never the end of the story. It is the beginning of revelation. Not the kind you read in books, but the kind you feel in your bones. When your world is shaken, what remains is what's real. And it is in those stripped down moments, when the facade is gone, when your hands are empty, that something extraordinary begins to form. Clarity, depth, purpose. The breaking does not bury you, it births you. And though you may not see it now, the invisible hand that allowed the pain is also the one preparing your rising. From the hidden hand that breaks with intention flows the refining fire that speaks a language all its own. Once everything familiar has been stripped away, once the false self begins to unravel, a different kind of voice emerges in your life. It is not loud. It does not come dressed in the words of comfort or the warmth of reassurance. It speaks in silence, in intensity, in transformation. The furnace becomes the classroom, and pain becomes the vocabulary through which deeper wisdom is taught. Where surface prayers once existed, now groans rise from the core of your being. These are not requests for relief, they are calls for revelation. Fire does not ask for permission, it simply burns, and yet, in its burn lies clarity. That which is inauthentic cannot survive the flame. The ambitions rooted in ego, the plans constructed without alignment, the attachments that once gave identity, they dissolve in the heat. And as they do, what remains is what cannot be taken. Faith that isn't based on results, intimacy that isn't dependent on answers, purpose that doesn't collapse under pressure. In the forge of suffering, your character is not only tested, it is redefined. You begin to discern what has eternal weight and what was merely ornamental. There are truths that only scar tissue can carry, not because they are too complex for the intellect, but because they must be felt to be known. Words formed in comfort often sound hollow to the hurting, but words spoken from within the flame carry a resonance that cuts through. They are not echoes, they are instruments. The soul that has endured the fire learns to speak less to be heard and more to be understood. And in that understanding, a kind of authority is born. Not the authority of power, but of presence. Others listen, not because you speak louder, but because what you say has been lived. And so, the fire is not the end. It is the beginning of voice, the beginning of rootedness, the beginning of depth. The soul emerges from the furnace not unburned, but purified, made rare, made strong. It no longer fears the silence of the universe, because it has learned that silence is not absence. It is intimacy. You become fluent in the language of fire, and in doing so, you become fluent in the quiet strength that only those who have suffered deeply can carry. Emerging from the fire, something changes, not just around you, but within. You no longer carry yourself with the same urgency to be seen, to be validated, to be understood. Instead, you carry something far more powerful, evidence. Evidence that you've endured, and more importantly, that you've evolved. Where the world once measured worth by perfection, you begin to realize that the universe selects its messengers by their scars. Not the invisible wounds carefully hidden, but the visible ones that bear witness to survival. These are the markings of one who has walked through suffering and still stands, not in bitterness, but in wisdom. Scars speak a language words often cannot. They say, "I've been there." They say, "I know what it means to break." In a world saturated with performance, nothing is more magnetic than authenticity. Those who have suffered deeply and chosen healing become beacons, not by force but by presence. They don't need to explain why they shine. People feel it. There's a gravitational pull in their stillness, a credibility in their quiet strength. The light they carry doesn't glare, it guides. It doesn't boast, it beckons. And those still lost in the chaos are drawn not by doctrine, but by the reality of what they see lived. Pain, transformed, becomes power, but not the kind that dominates. It becomes a subtle, stabilizing force. A person who has bled and been mended no longer fears imperfection. They embrace it. They speak not as preachers, but as proof. Every step taken after the breaking becomes part of a silent sermon, and that sermon doesn't need applause. It only needs to be walked. Because the universe does not call the untouchable, it commissions the touched, the wounded, the ones who walk slower now, but carry something sacred in their silence. Healing doesn't erase what happened, it reassigns it. The betrayal, the loss, the failure, they don't vanish. They become elements of the offering. There's a strange paradox in how the most shattered vessels become the most radiant ones. Light seeps through the cracks more easily than through untouched glass, and in those cracks, others begin to see their own reflection, their own potential redemption. Pain personalizes your power. You don't offer theory, you offer testimony. Not to elevate yourself, but to remind others, rising is possible. The universe does not elevate those with polished resumes, it elevates those with surrendered hearts. And a surrendered heart is one that has survived its own collapse. That survival grants a person authority, not the kind that shouts from a stage, but the kind that whispers directly into someone's darkest hour. When you've truly healed, your life becomes more than yours. It becomes a mirror, a compass, a light for those who haven't yet made it through. Not despite the scars, but because of them. When your scars begin to shine, not as symbols of shame, but as vessels of light, something subtle yet profound starts to unfold: surrender. It's no longer driven by exhaustion, fear, or defeat, but by revelation. You've seen that holding on tightly does not protect you, it imprisons you. Through pain, the illusion of control dissolves. You no longer carry the urge to bend the universe to your will. Instead, you start to align with it. And in that alignment, surrender is no longer a weakness. It becomes the threshold of power. Letting go doesn't mean giving up. It means releasing the need to orchestrate every outcome, and finally allowing the unseen wisdom that guided your breaking to also guide your becoming. True surrender is not passive. It's a courageous act of faith. It takes more strength to release than to resist. And once you do, space is created. Space where pride once sat, where fear once whispered, where ego once clung. That space becomes the chamber where unseen power begins to move. Not a power that demands or forces, but one that flows, effortless, steady, and exact. You begin to understand that divine strength doesn't operate like worldly dominance. The universe doesn't work through performance, but through positioning, and that position is always low, not in value, but in posture. Surrender says, I no longer strive to become who I think I should be. I'm willing to become who I was always meant to be. In this state, burdens lift. The noise dims, clarity sharpens. You are no longer racing to be heard, to be right, or to be recognized. You're simply present. And in that presence, unseen doors begin to open, within and around you. The paradox reveals itself. In losing the fight to maintain control, you gain access to something infinitely more powerful. Your past, with all its failures and pain, becomes part of the architecture, not something to be erased. The very things that once disqualified you now qualify you to carry depth, insight, and grace. And you realize, finally, that surrender was never about losing identity. It was about uncovering it. Beneath the layers of effort and ambition was someone shaped for something more enduring than applause: purpose. No longer striving, you begin to move with ease. Decisions aren't forced, they are felt. Direction doesn't come from pressure, but from peace. The unseen power of the universe operates in this rhythm, slow, quiet, undeniable. And as you walk in this surrendered strength, the weight you once carried transforms into a presence you now carry. You are not trying to shine, you have become light. Not through effort, but through yielding. Not by gripping tighter, but by letting go. After the breaking, a new version of you begins to rise, quietly, steadily, almost unrecognizably. The pain that once seemed like it would destroy you becomes the very soil from which strength grows. Not all things are restored to their original form, nor should they be. Some pieces remain altered, cracked, or missing altogether. But those broken edges catch the light differently now. The fragments of your old life begin to form a new shape, one that's not perfect, but more powerful, more present, more real than before. What once felt like devastation slowly reveals itself as divine design. The universe doesn't restore by rewinding time. It redeems by rewriting meaning. Scars, once seen as flaws, become the sacred script of survival. They tell a story not of weakness, but of resilience. Each one is evidence that something tried to break you and failed. Your suffering becomes the ink through which compassion writes its message. When someone meets you now, they don't just encounter a person. They encounter a presence that has been tempered by fire, and yet remains soft enough to hold another's hand through the heat. There is a quiet strength that emerges from ruins. You begin to understand life in layers. What once angered you now humbles you. What once frightened you now grounds you. Pain no longer owns you. It becomes a reference point, not a residence. The storms you survived recalibrate your values. Joy becomes simpler. Peace becomes more precious. And faith, true enduring faith, is no longer an idea you talk about but a force you carry. You don't cling to certainty anymore. You walk with trust. This transformation doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It arrives slowly, almost silently, as you realize you're no longer reacting out of fear, but responding with wisdom. Where you once wanted answers, now you offer presence. Where you once demanded reasons, now you extend understanding. People begin to listen, not because you shout, but because your very existence has something to say. Redemption has reshaped your posture. You stand taller, not because you're unbroken, but because you've learned how to walk with pieces. You are no longer a victim of your story. You are a vessel of its power. The ruins are still there, but they've been rearranged into something beautiful, something useful, something sacred. The universe did not remove your history. It repurposed it. And now every step forward becomes a quiet declaration. The breaking didn't end me. It equipped me. What once was a story of survival begins to radiate beyond the borders of your own life. You become a beacon, not because you aimed to be one, but because you walked through fire and didn't lose your light. People are drawn not to your perfection, but to your presence. There's a gravity in your energy now, a quiet authority that doesn't need to announce itself. You speak not as someone who read about the storm, but as one who has stood in its eye, wept through its winds, and emerged still breathing. The light that now lives in you was forged in darkness, and that origin gives it a depth no spotlight ever could. There is a distinct weight to a voice born from pain. It carries something the untouched can't offer: empathy without pity, truth without superiority. When others see your life, they don't see someone who avoided the fall. They see someone who learned how to rise. And because of that, your story becomes a mirror in which others can glimpse their own healing. Not everyone will understand what you carry. Not everyone will recognize what it cost you. But those who are meant to find you will. And when they do, your scars will speak the language of their silent wounds. Being a beacon doesn't mean having all the answers. It means being willing to stay lit, even when the wind tries to put you out. It means refusing to hide your process, just to look put together. The cracks in your foundation are no longer weaknesses. They're windows through which the light escapes. You don't need a platform. Your presence is the message. Without striving, you become an invitation to others, to feel, to heal, to believe again. The universe is not using your perfection to reach the world. It's using your redemption. You've become proof that healing is possible, that growth is real, and that pain is not the final word. Where others hide their past in shame, you carry it like a torch, because you know the night someone else is still walking through. What once nearly destroyed you now becomes a map for someone else to follow. And the beauty of it all? You're not leading them to you. You're guiding them to the same presence that led you through. You are not the destination. You are the evidence that the path exists. In conclusion, pain, when viewed through the eyes of eternity, ceases to be meaningless. It becomes the very path by which a person is refined, humbled, and commissioned. The universe does not put you through pain to break you down, but to build you into something deeper, truer, and unshakable. So if you are hurting, doubting, questioning your worth in the shadows, remember, the darkness you walk through today may be the very place your roots are taking hold. And when you rise as you will, you'll understand. The pain was not the end. It was the beginning of everything you were meant to become.